down, too transient out loud, intertwine our fragile frame, sleep beside the nave. When there's no story, there's no one to blame. Play is changing, the song remains the same. Moments melting down, golden puddles on the ground. Too much coffee in my cup, and I love you so much. The news is boring, a morning full of rain. Light a fire with paper tiger paint. Intertwine our fragile frame, sleep beside the nave. When there's no story, rest inside your gaze. Words have faded, but the salty taste remains. You better write this down. Too transient out loud.
Thank you, Nathan. And I have been charged with welcoming everyone to the Stoa. So hello. Welcome to apparently the second last session of the Stoa. Is that true, Peter? Yeah, the second last session of the Stoa. Right before we dropped in, I was describing to Peter that the crew that will be chatting might be a little bit in chaos mode, which will be fun. And Peter said something like, yeah, I'm in like give no fucks energy right now. And for some reason, I really liked that. There's something kind of, I don't know, playful and generative in that way in which you can just meet the chaos of the moment in a very, very improvisational, dynamic, alive way. So I think that's how Nathan, Ethan, and Taylor, the four of us are actually going to enter kind of like a, you could say like an improvisational dialogos together around our own personal journeys, being respond wisdom guides, whatever that means. And we're also joined by other folks in this call, Tataya as well, who is also a respond guide. So we're just going to be more dynamically, I think, jamming and following what draws us, the kind of eros and real desire for this type of work that's bringing us together. So I think first I just want to thank Nathan. Nathan is our, I guess, band leader, and he played us in, and there's like a, just want to thank Nathan, and maybe now pass it over to him for some framing around Respond, the network, and why we're all gathered here.
Thanks, Cheryl. So I'm not going to do any kind of in-depth explanation. If you want to learn more about the Respond network, you can go to rspnd.network. And there's a video there that explains in more detail like what we've been up to, what we're doing now. But basically, to give you just a general idea of like who we are in that network, I'll start with who we're not, or the role we're not playing. There are two roles that we kind of have defined. And it's not really defined by a person, but more the role they're playing. Some play both roles. The scholarks, so these are people like John Vervaeke, Benita Roy, a lot of people you've seen on the Stoa. And these are experts in the field of wisdom research, different aspects of that, whether it be embodiment, mindfulness, the imaginal, dialogue. And these people, we bring them together to try to help develop some theories and methods that like integrate all of their specific ways of looking into some ways that we could apply in general. And then there are the guides, and those are people like us who make offerings in the world, trying to act as a bit of a translation layer for a top-down, bottom-up convergence. The scholarks being sort of these like high theory, very intricate, very subtle ideas that are often super complex and beautiful. And then the average person who doesn't connect to that at all. And so we try to work as a guides. We're like a translation layer. How can we take these theories, these ideas, the beautiful things that are being worked on here, and translate that into something we can offer to everyday people, to our families, to our friends, people who aren't philosophers or cognitive scientists, or people who aren't interested in those kind of things, but nevertheless could benefit deeply from engaging and developing, cultivating their own personal wisdom. So that's just a super quick overview of what the Respond Network is about. I'll pass it back to Cheryl.
Somehow I knew you were going to pass it back to me. And I was not quite ready. So maybe I think this is the right time, since there's a bit of a frame on what Respond is. My sense is like probably folks here have like a bit of now an understanding of the scholarks and the wisdom cultivation work and the ecologies of practices that we're really hoping to be able to unfold as a network. But I think more importantly, we wanted to actually introduce and allow you to meet and get to know the people behind the network. So I will ask Peter. I think Peter's going to spotlight me, Nathan, Ethan, and Taylor. And I wonder, Tataya as well, if you're down, Tataya. Yeah? All right. Tataya sort of put on the spot right now. She has less of the pre-frame, all of the pre-prep, the elaborate pre-prep that we did for this call. So I think what we were hoping to enter was a kind of open dialogue, really drawing from our own personal experiences with why and how we're drawn to the work of wisdom cultivation and what it means to be a guide in this type of work, which is very much something that is in itself an emerging kind of role that we're learning about through embodying it with each other. So I might now pass it over to, whoever wants to pick it up first. I think Taylor, maybe you were. I'm going to pass it to Taylor and we'll continue the jam together.
Friends like these. I got ambushed with a trick while I was eating my lunch. So, yeah, what would I say? I'm aware of trying to resist saying the usual thing that I say about what sort of got me to this point and why I'm engaged in it, and I really don't know what else to say. I've been sort of working in this field, or at least in the field of relational leadership, but through the venue of practice for the last decade. Something that I was introduced to by my then girlfriend, although she had just recently been introduced to it, and now wife. And this is sort of in the world of authentic relating and circling. And through, the initial couple of experiences of that, and seeing how it was impacting our relationship, we just got very voracious, and wanted to do all the events and sign up for all the trainings. And then eventually 2-3 years later, we actually took over the management and the handling and the direction of the community here in Toronto. And then a few years ago, Peter actually introduced me to John Vervaeke. I got to, I guess, be the first one to circle him. And I didn't really know who he was at the time. In fact, I resisted learning anything about him because I was afraid it might actually impact the circle. But after having done that, the circling with him, that started a journey that's been going for the last 3 years of sort of looking at what's next or what's past, but also including, so transcending and including authentic relating and circling. And through that period, I became aware of Respond, and told John immediately, like, hey, I want to be in there. And he's like, well, we can each invite one person. You're the guy I'm going to invite. So it's been a heck of a last 6 to 8 months with Respond. It feels like a home for me. It's something that I've kind of always wanted, and I was trying to build in Toronto. I was always trying to do leadership trainings and facilitation trainings so that I could sort of build an army of facilitators to help us, achieve the things that we wanted to achieve. So my framing at the time would have been, to afford people more freedom, more choice in their life. And that has sort of evolved over into wisdom. In many ways, that was implicit wisdom framing, but I just didn't look at it that way. So through Respond and through the people who seem to be as dedicated, if not more than I am, which means it's not all on me, which is certainly something that feels really good. It's been just fantastic working with these 5. I mean, I'm so glad that Tataya is here. I'm so glad I cast the line and she bid it. And yeah, I'm just really excited about the work that we're doing here in terms of building and defining Respond, onboarding the few people that we've onboarded, the future growth of it, the work we're doing for the August retreats, this practitioner, scholark, and guide retreats. I just think some really cool things, artifacts can come out of it, that are all just in alignment with, a mission or a purpose that I sort of adopted, about 8 years ago, that I was really afraid to adopt. But I see myself, and I've said this before, I think I've said this on, and after Socrates, it's just, I feel called to be here, I feel called to do this work. It feels like it's something I can do. I have enough space or privilege to be able to do it, and not everybody does. So it's, I was about to use the word blessing, which is quite interesting. It's not a word I would use often, but that's what came to me. It feels a bit like a blessing to be able to do this and to work with these amazing people I can't wait to spend a month with in 6 weeks. So yeah, I think that's probably what I would say about sort of my journey, what got me to here. Yeah, maybe I'll just put the ball in the middle and see who wants to pick it up.
I'll pick it up. And what's coming up for me is, I've been here. Like, I've been connected to what is happening now since 2019. Because in 2019, I was in the process of developing the framework for my body of work that I offer. And the interesting thing is, there was an experience, there was something that I knew was possible, that didn't have a framework, and that my mission, like what I felt called to, was to develop a framework so I can bring the world, more people into it. Kind of like, Nathan, what you said about the scholars and the guides. Like you just named a thing that I've been doing for years, since 2009. And the beautiful thing is, I remember the first YouTube video of John Vervaeke. I remember listening to the Meaning Crisis, and I remember being in my room and having a whole embodied experience of being opened by a frame. I've never had that before. And the way that the scholar has influenced, informed, and opened me up to kind of see me in the body of work that I've been doing. So it was like a reverse engineer. And since that moment, there have been several scholars that I've been following that really supported deeply the work that I'm doing. And I'm so excited to then bring it back and see, is this true? Is this what I felt open to, and what I'm seeing, and what the experience that I know in my body, kind of going back up to the scholars and like checking and then being with others. I've been in kind of like in my world, developing this experience in an experiential way. And I'm like, oh, where are peers? I'm ready to be with peers and to step into this 6 weeks emergence experience, to know more, like to receive and to give. And I'm just really privileged to be invited into the circle. And yeah, that's what's coming up for me.
I'm amused. I'm imagining Cheryl and Ethan are playing chicken right now.
Because neither of us seemed to win the game when we were trying to figure out who would go first. Okay, I suppose alphabetical order seems to be the way to go. Yeah, I was thinking about this question for like, since we had started discussing that it would be the question, like, yeah, what's motivating me to be in the Wisdom Commons? What's motivating me to contribute to this space? And it's like I had a variety of iterations of answers, none of which satisfied me. Like, and these were things to do with like talking about my research or like the work that I do with actors or whatever stuff. It's like, it just never seemed to, how do I say it? It kept setting off my bullshit light in a way that I never really liked. It's like, I don't really want to talk about that. Which indicated to me that there was something like beneath that. And so I'll tell a story. And this was about like almost 1 year ago. I had gone to see a friend's show. So he was performing in a musical. And then I was like, brought my ex-wife. We went to go and watch. And then we were waiting outside to just like wait for him to come out and talk to him. And while we were waiting for him, there was a guy who was like about 9 or 10 feet away from me. Let's call him Edwin for anonymity's sake. So Edwin was standing about 9 or 10 feet away from me. And he's actually like the best friend of one of my ex-girlfriends. And I hadn't seen him in years. And so I was like, well, I was watching this guy, he was sort of there, and I had this pull to go, maybe I should talk to him. And then there was something in me that went, yeah, but like that's gonna be kind of awkward. It's like, things didn't really end well with the ex. Maybe he's like not in that space to want to talk to him. So I just shifted my attention to go and like, I'll talk to my wife. I'll like think about what we want to eat and whatsoever. My friend came out. We went to go eat Thai food. It was a lovely night. And then the next morning, I wake up and there's like a slew of Facebook eulogies for Edwin. And like, I mean, I'm not at liberty to share cause of death, but it's like there was something in that. I was in complete shock actually, because like there was something about a recognition of capacity and at the same time a weakness of character that prevented me from kind of just going, hey man, how are you? Like, what are you up to? It's not to say that I could have changed anything or whatsoever, but it's like not even that really, you know. So that kind of happened, I think probably almost like 2 weeks after the first episode of Voices of a Vacay that I was on. I was riding this high, and it's like it sort of woke me up in a different way. It's like, who cares about the work, you know, if the capacity is not brought to those who need it. So part of why I love being in Respond is like I'm around people whom I trust to like point at weaknesses in character and who do it in good faith in such a way that I know is loved. Like I know I'm loved and I'll grow. So that if, let me rephrase this with a bit more context. Like, I'm no stranger to people acknowledging my capacity, but it always came with a but. And particularly like these three folk, Cheryl, Nathan, Taylor, who I've known for longer, it's like, there is no but. It's like, okay, we'll run you through this thing, but we'll also check you before you wreck yourself, you know? And like, insofar as I'm concerned, this is where I feel like I might be moved to the place where I can be most useful with least resistance. That makes sense. Hi. Owatta. Cheryl.
Thank you. Really. Actually, right before this STOA session started, I was with a friend, and she is a soul maker. I'm also a soul maker. And the reason why we both identify as soul makers is because we're both, we both practice Robert Bea and Catherine McGee's soul making Dharma. And there's a way in which we've really invited a quality of like soulful devotion to the work of, to the wisdom path, you could say, to the soul path. They seem relatively interchangeable to me. And something that had really come through our conversation was this word duty. Like Robert Bea will always describe, like when you tune into your soul's calling, your soul work, and you find kind of right alignment with that, there's a way in which one's sense of duty or devotion to what you are to give to the world, what is your gift, it might actually be a struggle. Like it might actually be like audacious to even imagine. Like I think there's something so audacious to imagine us, like even with the Scholarks, even with John, even with Bonita Roy, with Nora Bateson, with like, you know, there's all these names, but there's something that's audacious about trying to create a wisdom metacurriculum, to try to actually cohere around practices and like really like a collective field of wisdom for this time. Because, and I think there's kind of like an aspect of this where we also all share this deep knowing that that's kind of the only way. Like, we're in this place right now. Yeah, we call it a time between worlds. We call it collapse. We call it existential risk, like meta crisis, like whatever you kind of label it. There's sort of this sense of, okay, something's like giving away, and we actually really need to equip ourselves with something that we might not have even, like, that we've never known really before. And it's going to feel very familiar because it's like ancestral, and it's deeply connected to lineage of those who have come before us, the wisdoms that run through us like rivers. And then we also have to be first movers. That's what Benita Roy calls the kind of like task or duty that each of us at some point have to kind of like own and fully step into, which is, I can't wait for someone else to do this work. I can't look for the answer outside of myself anymore. I can't wait for this world that I want to live in to just come into being without my active participation and my active like risk taking and my active like devotion and duty to this work. And I think like for me, over the course of the last 3 years of really, really tuning into that sense of duty, which feels immense, like so immense that I think when I just like talk about it, it's okay. But when I feel it, it can feel paralyzing. It can feel, yeah, it feels, yeah, it's just a lot. It's a lot. And what the Respond network and this kind of like field of guides that we're calling it a wisdom network or a sacred network, whatever it is, it's like beginning to form these connections that are radically needed. And in a way, it's kind of like a neural network that's seeking its connections. And I know, like, what I know deepest in my being is that any of this, the reason why the work feels overwhelming is because it's not supposed to be done alone. It's too big for any person to be able to hold. And frankly, when you try to do it, it would just collapse you. So there's really no other choice than to find the others. And when you find another, there's like a felt sense of just like immediate relief and expansion and like a meeting of kin, like, oh, we got each other on this, like, oh, this thing that seems like actually impossible, like feels kind of more available now because I'm with you, like we're together. And my sense is like, there's so many people who feel this way. They feel that work, they feel that thing that is theirs to give. And sometimes it does take actually like, oh, there's others. Okay, cool. Then maybe I can do it too. And I think building that collective field, yeah, it makes the impossible future feel much more available. Yeah. Pass it to Nathan.
Soaking that in for a second. Yeah, it's strange to me to find myself here in this place. I think I spent decades of my life like deeply depressed in a worldview of like relativistic nihilism. And I was a musician. And so there's this contradiction at the base of my existence where like on the one side, I was tuning into beauty all the time. Like, and I had these moments that just felt overwhelming and just like, wow, I'm being sucked forward into something that's just glorious. And when I wasn't playing music, it's kind of like I was playing Santa Claus. And so the felt sense was like, yeah, there's this illusion that's really comforting, but it's bullshit. Like everyone is just racing along in some kind of like post-capitalist, competitive, egoistic world, and all of this beauty stuff. Yeah, it's a nice show and it pays the bills, and I guess that's something I've get used to, which collapsed me so hard for so long. And it's interesting, like the role of guide kind of, for me, came into my life through Peter and through Daniel Thorson. As I see them as kind of like the proto version of what then developed as like, oh, so I kind of got a little, I mean, I started after like being on the brink of suicide in a very, very deep state of like, yeah, just the worst kind of place that you might be able to imagine. I started to do some emotional healing. I started to just like thrash around and try to figure out what the hell, how am I going to, I had recently had a son. And I tried to figure out how I was going to keep myself alive forever. And so I just started thrashing around, trying to figure it out, doing everything I could, learning how to feel my feelings. That was a big one. Learning how to talk about them with others, another big one. And as I started to move along this progression, I started to make art out of sort of socializing. I was making games, and that led to a sort of curriculum. And that's where I met Peter, who's taking this class. We were talking about social design. And I was just like blown away by this guy and this mega brain who could feel his feelings. And I was just like, wow, this. And then it wasn't much later that Daniel Thorson also took the class. And I was like, what the hell? Who are these people? What's going on? Like, because I was still hanging out with people, like my main majority of people that I'd been around had been either smart or emotionally connected. And I was finding this like people who had integrated that somehow. And it just like blew me away. I ended up going and training with Daniel at Willow when they opened the Monastic Academy in Canada for 3 months. That's where I met Cheryl. And it just started like all these little, just connecting to these people and finding like, wow, all of that, what I had for so long taken to be just some illusion is like, as Berbea says, sort of real and not real, but real, not just not real. And it really saved me from a deep despair and loneliness and feeling of like helpless, blah, there's nothing but putting your head down and getting through it. And then I started to meet other people. Here's, you know, they just started introducing me to others, like, oh, you should meet this person, you should meet this person. And as I started to get to know all of these different people, I started to like feel like, why aren't we all pushing on this rock together? Like, why is there such a siloed, like people doing stuff and everybody's doing stuff? And it's like, you're all doing something that's pushing in the same direction. Like, it's a team. It's just not visible to itself. And that's what like sort of started me off. And now I'm in this weird role where I don't know, like sort of connecting people, bringing them together, trying to like coalesce something like a vision, which is like the farthest thing from what I could have imagined would make any sense to do in this like nihilistic past of mine. To have a vision was just to be like even more delusional and probably some kind of like move to make yourself feel special. And now I'm like deeply in with a group of beautiful people, like feeling into what is good, what is true, like how can we move forward together? how can we manifest midwife this thing? Like, and I resonate with all of these shares. It's like, there's so many layers to that. And it's super unclear. Like, I don't have a vision. I don't even think there is a vision. I'd be very scared of myself if I started to come up with, oh, I have the answer. But I have this, there's a draw, there's a, like, it's almost, I say a drive, but actually it feels like it's sucking me forward. And I'm kind of helplessly doing stuff. Yeah, you know, going through like these waves of like, oh, this is just insane. It's so much chaos and confusion. And then it's like, oh, I think we've got it. I think we've got it. And then just like back and forth and back and forth. Yeah, but it's like I'm in love with something and it's pulling me into it. And yeah, it feels like a pretty good way to spend my life. So it's kind of where I am. Gonna throw it back in the middle.
Yo, as you were speaking, right, and you were talking about love, and this kind of sense of being pulled for. I suppose this is an open question, to all y'all. Are the wisdom guides being guided by wisdom also? And what is that like? If it is.
I mean, it occurs to me that the answer to that is yes, based on how we've currently defined the process and the deepening of wisdom. So if the process of wisdom is the harmonizing of view, care, and action, which I think is something the guides are knee deep in, from a mindful perspective. And it deepens through the tuning into well-being of relationships. I mean, the fact that there's a network, you know, the focus on the present, the focus of well-being within ourselves, within the network, and to the world. I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't think I would ever use that language. I don't think I would say I feel like I'm guided by wisdom. I think there's still some resistance somewhere for me about the term wisdom in certain ways. But if I break it down or define it or look at the trajectory of it, it seems pretty obvious that the answer to that would be yes.
Yeah, thanks for naming the resistance to wisdom, like the word wisdom. I think that's worth it. We've been talking about that for a while. Nathan, do you have some? I noticed some like facial response.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, like, I think it is, wisdom is a sound that we're making. You know, I mean, so what do we mean? But it does seem to me that I'm committed to trying to follow. I mean, I'm defining it in the terms of this, like, the aspects of reality that resonate with truth, goodness, and beauty. And like, I'm committed to trying to follow it. And I don't know if I'm being led by it or not, or I am and I'm not. And that's why, for me, like, I can't be led by wisdom on my own, not well. And if it's always a bit of a risk when I'm trying to do it on my own. And when I'm in conversation with you all, and then other people on this call, and people who aren't here today, and they're also similarly attuned, like trying to also like just let that guide us somehow. I feel like that's happening. So I don't know if I'm being guided by wisdom. I'm sort of, there's this, gonna get a little academic here, but like Wilfred Cantwell Smith, this guy who started, I know you know. He's the founder of religious studies, right? He wrote a book called Faith and Belief, the Difference Between Them. And what he talks about is like how oftentimes in our modern language, we conflate these two words. Faith is belief, same thing. People will say, faith in God, believe in God, means the same thing. And what he was pointing out was that, like, in an older cognitive cultural framework, to have faith was it was something, it was like, it wasn't to believe in the existence of something. It wasn't like, oh, actually, you can use the word belief this way too. You can say like Bob Dylan has a song, I Believe in You, right? And it doesn't mean like I believe you exist. It means like I pledge my allegiance to you. I have faith in you. I'm on your side. I'm with you. And in this way, it's kind of like I have faith in wisdom. Like I try to pledge my allegiance and put myself on the side of that which is good and true and beautiful and let it guide me. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I would say almost like to say I'm being guided by wisdom would be like presumptuous and probably put my relationship with it in danger. So I try. I give it like I have faith in wisdom. I faith wisdom as a verb, and then I have to do that in community because there's so much to me. There's like resonance between wisdom and what is real, and I can't possibly as one little simulation of reality like understand where I'm deceiving myself. So I need you all to check me, right? And to show me and to think with me. And if there's resonance in a group of people who have committed themselves to that, which I feel often in these groups and the times we talk, when there's resonance there, I can trust that way more than I can trust that I'm not deceiving myself into some kind of, for 1,000 reasons you could deceive yourself. But yeah, it's my deep wish to be led by that, and I faith it, and I think in community it's even happening.
Yeah, as you were sharing that, right? There was this like image of like people being like the relationships that exist, like say in our meetings. It's like starting here, the path is going this way, and if this person weren't here, it might get past the point of rightness and go into like chaos and disappear somewhere. But then there's something about having someone there that is in a deep relationship that kind of shapes it and moves it, and so there is this flow that's kind of following, or that I can like, I intuitively understand what you're talking about in the form of this image, and I'm resonant with it. But it's something it's something like that. Cheryl, do you know what I'm talking about? Like,
yeah, what's coming up, what's been very present for me has been actually something that Karuna, who's also working with us on Respond, and she said something that's been staying with me around what she sees the guides having in common. And she said that what she senses the guides have is like a felt sense or vision of a world that they feel called to bring into being. And they're almost like their duty is to facilitate that world to come into being. And something I really appreciate, like what I love about her description of a guide is there's like a way in which each of us, like it doesn't mean that we all have to be moving towards the same world. Like there's actually a way in which it kind of like allows each guide as kind of like in their own relationship with their daemon, or that kind of like sense of calling to the world that they are in service to like really work on like building, like it's like really, really like building that world, but to do so in relationship with others. Like I'm drawn to the world that Nathan is building. I feel kind of like attraction and arrows towards that. And I feel drawn to the world that Ethan's building, and the world that Taylor's building, and the world that Tataya's building, and the world that Daniel's building, and the world that Peter's building. Like there's a way in which I feel the like intrinsic uniqueness, like that the kind of like intrinsic pluralism of how when each kind of like guide is attuned to the world that they are responsible to cultivating, something emerges across like the patterns that begin to form between worlds. Like there's like almost like new holes that get created as these worlds come into relationship with one another. And that's like the type of work that is really difficult to steward, because that's like, that for me is like what arises out of fields of collective wisdom. Like what arises of its kind of like own accord from the middle that not any one of us is able to create on our own. So it's in relationship with this question that you're asking about wisdom, because when you were asking that question, Ethan, immediately what also popped into my head was one of the principles that we hold around the Skull Arc retreat, which is follow Sophia. It's like when people come together, like when anyone comes together, we're always like in service, in devotion to Sophia. And what I love about like the word Sophia as a kind of archetypal, I guess, like expression of wisdom is that there's like a sense of like who is Sophia? Like what does it mean for her to be guiding us, to be directing us? And there is like, when I tune into that, there's almost like it feels like, I don't know, Virgil or Beatrice like guiding Dante through the Inferno and into like through all these like levels of change that we're all being ushered through. So what happens when there's like a proliferation of many different Sophias? Like, what if we're all guides in that way to ourselves and to each other? Yeah, and that like, it's funny when I say that, then it's like not like one image of wisdom, one image of Sophia, but like what arises then is like murmurations. It's like, oh, like images of something that like a shape or a morphology or a pattern that arises from kind of like deep-rooted calling. But yeah, there's like a way in which there's like a sacredness or a divinity to it, because we can't make it happen. It just like arises. And that for me is like, is that Sophia? Is that wisdom? Like, how do we tune into that pattern? Yeah. Aylin.
Yeah, this has been alive for me for a few minutes, and I think it ties in the question with what Nathan's talking about with faith, what you're talking about, the calling, and I'm going to actually move this over into asking Tataya if it resonates for her. So for me, I noticed while Nathan was talking about it, I started to think about the practice of surrender, which I believe Tataya is quite familiar with. And it sort of occurred to me that maybe the thing that I'm more giving up to or I have faith in is the logos. And if I think about my experiences in my practice of surrender, that's probably the thing I'm surrendering to. I mean, sometimes we'll use the term the divine, but to me, the divine actually would be logos anyways. So I'm sort of wondering if, that's why I said, I don't know if I would use those words, but I could see how they connect. Maybe logos is divine wisdom, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure it's defined as that actually, in which case then yes, I do feel very pulled and guided by wisdom, or at least divine wisdom. So yeah, I'm sort of curious how that might resonate for you, Tataya, given your past experience in the space that you work in. I feel like, surrender might be, in a leadership or facilitation position, one of the strongest tools that we have in, being in relationship with other people in what's here in the present moment, which is the tuning in and well-being of relationships. So yeah, that's sort of what what I'm alive with. I'm curious how it lands for you.
Totally, Taylor. I'm gonna weave a few things that I've been with in the sharing, and that is this, what comes for me, and also imagining what a guide is. It feels to me it's the place inside of me that is following some crumbs, that it's calling me forward, but I'm also moving toward. So it makes me think of, I think you said first responders, Cheryl, the principle of like responding to something, and what is the thing that we're responding that is guiding us or we feel guided by. And so inside of that, when I think of the word wisdom, when I think of the word wisdom, it feels something more abstract to me than when I touch into beauty, truth, and goodness. So going back to your question of surrendering in logos, for me, there is a way, a very intimate way to be with my moment and like moment to moment experience, but navigating. It's like riding the wave of what I'm discovering in myself with others, but there's like a 3-point contact. I'm here, I'm speaking, but I'm feeling myself inside, and I'm hearing myself, but I'm looking at you and feeling the space in between as well. So this the word comes maybe like the intimacy, but the fidelity in which I can be with my experience, be with and express. And, you know, then there's another part of how that lands and receive as I express all these points of contact of the experience of surrender that leads to, I think, what we're asking ourselves, what is guiding us? What is, how is it that we are able to follow the crumbs of that which seems beautiful to us, that we're struck by, or that feels truth to us, or that is good and that has a life of its own, that I feel I carry a fire on, and that I know, but I don't know, like you said, Nathan, like I don't have a vision, I got the answer, but there's it feels to me, the word in English is, it feels evident. It's evident, but it's not, inside a box. This thing that moves through me, then I respond and then interact with here, right now, and discover what is more. Yeah. First responder, thank you. Yeah. So in a way, in a way, sorry to interrupt you, it's like, I start to feel more excited because it's like, oh, kind of what you were saying, Cheryl. I feel I'm an agent, but I feel we're all agents, and in the capacity that we can not only embrace, but the capacity to connect with ourselves as agents in what, like, the way that we're able to respond to like the inside, but then with one another. And so I feel my own fire right now. Like, it's like a lot, right, Cheryl? Like the thing that you were saying is like, whoo, it's bigger than this little body right here. Yeah.
It's hot in here. Yeah, it is. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I really loved your share, Tataya. And I'm still with this image of the following of the crumbs. And I want to point a little bit at like what's implicit in that is that the guide is not at the destination beckoning people over. The guide is in the crew, and we're still going, and I really, really appreciated you pointing at that. And there was also something in there about like trying to tie into the surrender piece and Nathan's share from earlier, and this kind of interrelationality or the relationality piece is like, well, sometimes you can see the crumbs and I can't. And we'll get to a place, and then sometimes I'll spot a crumb on the floor that like happened to be in my periphery. I go, hey, Tataya, come here. I see that, you know. And it's kind of almost this, oh my God, this is us in the back of my head, but it's like we're just walking. The goal is to just keep walking, just keep on going. And something that I've been telling people recently. Actually, no, that's bullshit. I don't always tell people this. I put it on my dating profile, see who takes up the challenge to fight me on it. Is God is real but doesn't exist.
Mm.
Like doesn't exist in the way a cup exists. It's the divinity is there in the walking, in the moving, in the pilgrimage, I suppose. So thank you for that, Tataya. That was quite beautiful. Thank you for giving me that insight.
I'm just aware that I'm actually doing something I wouldn't have done even 4 or 5 years ago. And that's just, I mean, mind you, I'm talking now, so I've broken it, but I was just sort of sitting in and really appreciating and absorbing like the flavor of what was brought, like actually trying to find a way to experience the richness of life rather than moving from thing to thing to thing. So yeah, I found a bit of an appreciation in that moment. I'm like, all right, I didn't used to be able to do this. This is cool.
Chris's question, as all of you are on the journey, do you feel more distant from your past work and relationships, or do you see opportunities to repurpose them? As all of you are on the journey, do you feel more distant from your past work and relationships, or do you see opportunities to repurpose them? Wow, that's a great question.
I have so much I could say about this, but it would just suck up the rest of our remaining time. So I'm more or less like, maybe somebody's got something more succinct. So I'm like holding myself back.
Don't hold back.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
The Tay train will leave the station, and when it leaves, it goes.
Chris, yeah, you went through the story. Well, yeah. But as I think of past relationships, a lot of them are still behind me. I dropped a lot of my relationships when I got into authentic relating and circling, which of course is, usually the surefire sign that you're in a cult or something, but really, no, it was nothing about that. And for me, it was really that more of like an ownership of me. And like, I have wants too. And once I had a sense of what was possible in relationship, I just wanted it all the time. Oh my God, we can actually talk about something real, like really real. We can actually like go into the depths. Like that can be more like, I don't drink. I don't do drugs. And, back then I drank and would do, smoke the odd joint. And it's just like, I have no need for that now. I used to do amateur motorsport, to sort of get a particular type of, thrill to feel really alive. And I used to watch a lot of horror movies. And my story about that was to help me feel really alive. And I just don't do that anymore because I sort of possess this capacity to be with people or to find the people who can drop in and sort of be with what's really here. And that can often bring a lot of that aliveness and intensity that I was always seeking in other forms. So I think there was a part for me that in the relationships I had at the time, I did that annoying sort of thing where I was trying to bring people in, like, follow me, do this, like, this could be so awesome if you do this with me. And most of them, some people tried it out, but they couldn't quite, I guess, get there or let themselves get there. I created a men's group with a bunch of guys that I knew, which is in some ways a bit of a mistake. It was great and fine, but I just noticed like, yeah, we're not getting the quality of what's available. So yeah, I had a sense of what I wanted and what was served me and what didn't serve me. And I started to actually like sort of audit my relationships, see if it was available. If it was available, great, we'll keep that relationship. And if it wasn't available, I've got a finite amount of time on this planet, you know, a job, a kid, wife, I've got responsibilities. So it's like, I'm going to sort of honor this and actually, you know, lean in and seek these relationships. Having said that, one relationship that I had that did break, I've actually sort of restarted, and I hold a different perspective on it. I don't expect that relationship to reach this particular height anymore. And through the acceptance of it, this, you know, this is the arena that we'll play in that relationship, and knowing that it is and accepting it, I can play full out within that, and I still hold that relationship. So I would certainly say I'm more aware of the relationships that I keep or that I seek out. But I have not tried to, you know, sort of go back to those people whom I care a fair bit about, but just, you know, wasn't really sure actually day to day, you know, in the enrichment of my life, what I was actually getting out of it. So yeah, so there were things that I had to let go.
I want to pick up on that a little bit as we talk about needs and relationships. And you know, very similar to Nathan, which by the way, I didn't know very much about your past as well. But like I was kind of surprised. I too was also in quite a narcissistic kind of nihilism. And there was something about that which drove me towards suicide, which drove me towards depression. The only difference between me and Nathan's anecdote there is that his art somehow managed to put food on the table and mine didn't. So like that shocked me. But when it came to relationships and work, it's really fascinating. It's like I sometimes ask this to my clients and I have to ask it myself. It's like, well, what kind of person do I want to be? And the thing that was driving all of the negative affect in my life had something around, was kind of converging on resentment and bitterness, some form of that. And so it's like, okay, maybe I want less of that. I want almost none of it, as much as humanly possible. Try and like flush it out of my system. And there were many ways to do that. Alcohol is one way to do that. Drugs is one way to do that. I tried both. And I think it was coming into the Wisdom Commons 2 years ago now. Something like that. Where it's like, okay, no, maybe it's that I just want to love things. Let me try loving things. Let me try loving people. Let me try loving life as much as possible. And something really bizarre happened. So I'm going through a divorce at the moment. And it's like I had to tell my ex-wife, she had sort of levied the Hollywood thing of like, if you love me, you'll let me go kind of adage. You know, it was implied. And I had to think about that for like 2 weeks and then sort of come back and go, actually, no, like, I think in order to love you, I have to let you go. And that's about like saying, okay, this is the relationship state as is, and this is how far we have to be apart from each other for me to not have any resentment, not any bitterness, but to wish the best for you as much as possible. Like, this is the distance from which love becomes accessible. And that's shown up in my art also, it's shown up in my friendships as well. And it became less of a letting go, but more of like a respacing or like a rearranging, I think. So I wouldn't say like repurpose. I think that feels, because there's no purpose. It's just like, I want to love you as best I can. And sometimes that just means like, I can't see you and talk to you. Because if I do, I'd hate you. Unfortunately. Yeah. So different take on it from Taylor's, but I thought I'd throw that in some way. Cheryl gave me a heart shape. I saw that. I saw it's disappeared now.
When I look back at my story in like past work and current work, I can find cycles. And when I look at the cycles, it reminds me of like being an adolescent and having to push something away to find like what's the new. And so I was a lawyer in Venezuela, and I remember all the outside was looking great and shiny, but I just had this space inside of me of, when am I going to fall in love with this thing? Like, when does that happen? And I would look at people who would have the internal that I was missing. And, you know, it took turning away from that to walk in myself and get to pay attention to my internal to find the new. And, you know, for years and years, I kind of like discarded the capacities that I built there, or it wasn't valuable somehow. And when I look into my journey again, and yoga was the next iteration of like, oh, getting to know who I am, breathing and moving, and just like very eye oriented. Again, then I had another cycle where, well, what is this all for if it's not translated into relationships? So then I kind of did the same thing to yoga, and like, oh, you're not valuable to me anymore. I'm going to go and, you know, grow this other garden. And when you ask the question, Chris, about does it feel, I think, distant, or from my past work, I don't feel that. But depending on the stage of the cycle that I am, I could feel that. But it feels to me now that I am able to repurpose, like to kind of use, it's like a set of tool. I have a toolkit, and then I have access to it according to whatever. And I'm still, it's kind of like the include and transcend. There's things I need to go back to in order to move forward. I need to go back to. So it feels like an ongoing relationship of, I don't know, reconciling and integrating for me. And this the adolescent thing feels real. Like, I'm going to turn around. And then I come back, you know. Oh, you're muted, Taylor.
Thanks. There's something in that reminds me that, you know, I've been saying for years about my past where I was very misanthropic. And, you know, now I feel like I had the capacity to love anyone. I still believe that that's true. However, I actually feel like I'm going back and reclaiming some of my misanthropic positions, you know, so there's like a way in which I'll like allow myself to get really angry and frustrated with humanity as a whole. And in fact, I can also like transmute that in a certain way back into sort of love and back into my mission. So there's a way in which I've allowed it rather than, you know, bypassed it, you know, like, oh, I'm over with that. And it's like, I still can, like, I still believe in the thing that I think it's Decker Kunov said something, if you don't like somebody, you just don't know them well enough, or if you hate somebody, you don't know them well enough. So I still believe that's really true, but I also need to hold the space for in the complexity of life and the amount of time that I have, sometimes the wise thing to do is just hate them and move on. You know, so yeah, I feel like I've allowed myself to sort of reintegrate or accept, you know, that that's still there, and not really try to bypass it, and I can more own it, and I can also step back and look at it too, right? Sort of like where I'm at. It's like, oh, you're still doing that thing, you know, as opposed to I don't do that anymore, you know, pushing it into shadow. Yeah.
Just to jump in, Chris dropped me a message and let me know. He said, you know, maybe not so much repurpose, but alchemize. Do I burn or do I alchemize? You know, and I'm hearing that as coming out of Tataya's share, which is super valuable. Bring back into this thing of like, okay, so this experience has existed. It afforded me a certain something that I might need at a period of time. And I really resonate what you're saying of like, now it's almost like it's like elements to be used for the future, elements that can move itself to the future at some point. Is that, I'm noticing your eyebrows furrow. Am I like correct me if it doesn't work out? Like, can you like synthesize it a bit more? Would you like to? You're muted.
No, not really. Continue. Yeah, no, please continue. Yeah.
And the alchemy thing is something that had come up in a meeting. We were like, okay, well, you know, it's Are we working with chemicals and then trying to like reach into our past, reach into something that we know or might have forgotten, and then bring it together in a new way that might be useful for, ouch, that hurt. That might be useful. And where this really landed for me in the alchemy line is particularly to do with my culture. I had turned my head away from my Chinese culture for a long time, and really only through speaking with folks in this little corner of the internet that is like, I need to take a look at Chinese philosophy and history and my dialect and the words and the music and the forms of art. And it's like, I'm now perpetually in this place where it's like, how did I ignore this for so long and resent it for so long? It's so valuable. It's problematic now, but it was so valuable, It's almost like at some point we threw the baby out with the bathwater, and now I'm like running down the street going like, oh, the babies, no, pick them up, like dry him a little bit. I see you. So thank you so much for that, Chris. Like I really enjoyed that reframing.
That same experience recently, like just in the past maybe 6 months, I've been having that experience with like Christianity. I grew up in like a fundamentalist Protestant America. You can imagine Indiana, if you've ever been there, which if you haven't, just imagine your prototypical conservative religious American zealot community. That's where I grew up. And then I like was so allergic to it. It's a deep wounding thing. We don't have to go into it, but like worked through all that and just kind of like, and got to where I didn't resent it anymore. Just like never really looked at it anymore. And then more recently, I'm like reading, I can't remember what I was Googling something, and then like some Bible passage came up and I read it and I was like, huh. And then I started reading these things. And the same words, just totally recontextualized. Like suddenly it's like, yes. So trust in the Lord with all your heart. Like I'm like, when I was little, it was like this, like, oh, you better believe these things that we're saying. And now it's more like, if I just replace the word Lord with like void, or like, trust in like source with all of your heart, don't lean on your own understanding. I'm like, oh yeah, that's pretty good. It's so weird. Like that just resonated with me, this sort of like shift to recognize the beauty of the place I came from that I initially had like rejected so vehemently. Yeah, thanks for bringing that in.
Ethan, I'm still deeply touched, and it goes with what you just said, Nathan, about the beauty, but like the phenomena of our humanity that forgets, or that like disconnects from something, and the process of that as a natural cycle, and then to come back and embrace it again. Like that, what you just said, Nathan, like, oh my gosh, like the parts of us that somehow, again, we need to move away from, to come back in there's something I'm finding so beautiful about that as a way, as part of being human, in the alchemizing, in the growth, in the, I don't know if this fits or not, but like chaos, order, chaos, new order, chaos, new order. Yeah, thank you for bringing that piece, Ethan.
I mean, Chris brought it.
Chris, thank you for bringing that piece. Yeah.
I want to also, this topic makes my heart like really twist. There's like something around this question that I really hold as a deep tension in my body, which is like sometimes it can feel like in this kind of work, we're like moving forward and leaving something behind. Like, and a lot of those are like relationships or people. It can feel like that for me. Like, and sometimes like the developmental framing, which I really find like, can reinforce that. And I noticed that what keeps coming up for me is I have family dinner every Sunday with my parents and my brother and his girl, like his wife. And it's just like we meet every single Sunday, and we've been doing it for decades. And if people are traveling, we don't do it, but it's like a beating pulse. Like we just always meet. And ever since I was young, I've always felt very different from my family. Like they're a little bit more kind of like conventional Chinese Canadian. Like they really wanted me to be a lawyer or a doctor. And they still have no idea what I'm doing now. There's like a real sense of I'm an alien to them in a lot of ways. And there was a lot of like a feeling of I don't belong. I remember when I was a teenager, it's like, I don't belong here. And I would test that a lot too. It's like every time I got weirder or like further away from like what was normal in that family system, I would be worried that it would tear the relationship. It's like, oh, this will be the time when they no longer love me and I'll no longer belong with the family because like now I'm here, I'm further away. And somehow it's like, through the ritual of family Sunday dinner, we'll fight. Like my brother, will show up to dinner and he'll laughingly say all the time, I think Cheryl's a cult leader. Like he'll just like call me a cult leader, but as like a joke, but also not as a joke. And then my parents would be like a little bit concerned. And my mom would seriously say, Cheryl, are you trying to start cults? And I'll say, no, Mom, I'm not, but also maybe I am. And I think there's like something really dear to me about those kinds of, it's like that tether that can feel like when I'm pulled really far away from family, when I feel very different, it's like really, really tight. But it almost feels like whenever I'm still kind of like held in the field of their belonging, because they love me no matter what. They love me no matter what, no matter how weird I get, they just continue to love me and accept me. There's like a resilience in that feels very important. And it does bring me back to ancestral wisdom, Chinese wisdom, like my mom making weird like stick stew as medicine. And I'm like, what is that? And I realized that, oh no, there's like wisdom in that when she makes me stick my tongue out and she figures out like she makes me stick my tongue out when she's trying to figure out if I'm healthy or not. That's like wisdom. So I think, this feels very soothing to me to have this conversation because there has to be ways in which we're staying connected in love in that way. No matter how far, sometimes it feels like we are from home.
I just want to point something out off the back of that share, Cheryl. Like a part of it is also because I also Chinese. So I hear the stick thing and I'm just like, yes. There's a resonant layer with that, but there's also something which I want to highlight, which is that it is bilateral. It's not unilaterally imposed from mom. There is a conscious step that I'm hearing you're taking to engage with that. And how easy it is to sometimes, at least I'm guilty of this, to like fall into like the scientific rationalization kind of box of like, why am I drinking this ash water thing? Like this been disproven for like hundreds of years. But there's something in doing that in and of itself, and to take the step forward to meet that. And so as you were speaking in that way, like, I don't know, I'm getting pretty emotional about this. Like, well, it has multiple reasons, but I won't get into this now. There was a series of like 3 haikus that were written to like kind of summarize the three eras of Japanese imperial history. And the first one to characterize Nobunaga was, if a bird doesn't sing, kill it. And then the second one for Hideyoshi was, if a bird doesn't sing, make it sing. And then the third one for Ieyasu is, if a bird doesn't sing, wait for it to sing. And something that's been coming up for me quite recently and has just emerged again is like, I feel like we're at that point of Kairos where if a bird doesn't sing, sing to it till it sings back. And that's something which I feel like as a guide, like I hold quite closely. Even if that thing is kind of pushing back, it's like, whoa, no, just keep singing, keep singing, keep singing. Yeah.
That reminds me of sort of my relationship with my father. And I noticed, as Cheryl was talking about part of her relationship with her family, I noticed the contrast for me. And I actually felt a lot of gratitude that despite my father is definitely the one who taught me my misanthropic tendencies, without a doubt, he's surprisingly open to attend authentic relating and do circling. This is somebody who would never articulate his feelings other than anger towards or anywhere near me. So yeah, I just really was able to drop into a lot of gratitude that that was able to happen in the final years of his life. It sort of reminds me that through the gift of that, it actually afforded me an opportunity to settle a lot of things with my father, such that when he passed, it didn't feel like there was any unfinished business. Like it felt like we had shared reality. Like I knew how he felt about me. He knew how I felt about him. Yeah, it was really beautiful. And I don't think that would have been available without the work that I had started a number of years earlier. So yeah, just sort of alive with that gratitude right now. Tiffany says fathers can be very angry. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure Tataya remembers me working through my anger in Avalon. Yeah, I have a different relationship with anger now. Thank God. Yeah, I feel much more fluid and much more willing to express it and work with it. Before, where I would just hold it in and sort of skirt out the sides and, take a small thing and blowing up at somebody. Yeah. And I noticed, knowing that I got that from my father, I'm not angry. And yet there was a time when I would have been. But I feel like we had that shared reality. And I got to understand who he was. I actually thank my wife, who was also doing the authentic relating stuff with me at the same time. She highlighted something I never realized about my father. So yeah, again, just that feeling of gratitude for starting the journey at all. And what would it have been like if I didn't?
I'm actually curious if there are any more questions in the audience. Audience, like in the room. I just call it in the room. Sorry, I'm a theater person. But if there's any other like questions, I really valued like this kind of exchange, and I thank the questions that have come and the comments that have come that really provoked quite a lot of like embers in the bonfire. Yeah. So if there's any more, please, like the invitation is, hey, dozo.
I'll also note we have about 5 minutes till 90 minutes are up. I don't know, actually, I wanted to take the opportunity to call in Peter. If you're down to, I'm going to add a spotlight for you as like a proto guide. I'm curious what's alive for you, and yeah, whether there's anything that want to be shared.
First, I really enjoyed this conversation. Really lovely. A lot of threads opened up. And the thing that was stuck out most to me was Ethan's question: are the guides guided by wisdom? And I went over and got this book, The Agony of Eros by Byung-Chul Han. And the story there, like I actually got this book for, Taylor has it as well. I bought this book for John. I buy this book for everyone. I bought this book for John. I gave it to him in a circling session. He says, oh, I already have that. I already read that like 20 times. I'm like, yeah, of course. So I gave it to Taylor. It's a really good book. And I'm going to read the portion of it, section of the politics of Eros. Eros guides the soul, according to Plato. It holds sway over all its parts: pleasure-based desire, appetites, spiritedness or courage, thumos, and reason, logos. Each spiritual component has its own mode of enjoyment and interprets the beauty in its own way. And he goes on that saying like our society is sort of like preoccupied with the appetites, and if without logos, without Eros, just turns into like data-driven calculations. And so this like being guided by Eros, I think Cheryl and I kind of I use the word daemon, and then she uses Eros kind of interchangeably. And when I follow the daemon, it's like actually pointing me to my own foolishness, and I'm realizing how deeply unwise I am. So I don't know if I consider myself a wisdom guide. Maybe I'm a proto guide, but if I were to answer that question for myself, I'm not being guided by wisdom. But I'm allowing myself to be guided by something that is shoving my foolishness in my face. And it's great, really, because I don't want to be a fool or stay a fool. I want to be the opposite of foolishness, wise. But I think it's really important to be humble and know where I am. And then the last thing I say, I think there's like a freedom with being a fool. And I'm reminded of the Christian archetype of the holy fool or the fool saint. A fool who is wholesome, but eccentric, at odds with social conventions and norms. And I do sense it is the holy fools who will be doing the right experiments, like this Respond experiment that's happening in August, in order to see the adjacent worlds that are open to us. But the fools will be judged and they'll be laughed at, like Cheryl's story with her family indicated. But I think it's a sacrifice that's going to be worthwhile. And at this point, I don't even know. It is a choice, but sometimes it doesn't feel like a choice. Yeah, so that's a lot for me.
Anya writes, what do you deeply desire in the relational field of us who are in the room here with you?
I'm going to borrow from Kevin Bowers. He talks about being stirred. I hope that you're stirred by what you heard. Mm-hmm. Something shifts, this idea of, John's idea of the frame and bringing noise into it to break the frame. And I hope we provided sufficient noise to break your frame, even if just a little bit.
I just have this feeling like I know through the people here, I've met, there's just this mycelial sort of like connection. And every time I meet someone here, the ones that I know, it's just been the glorious sort of like opening in my life to a new way. Like as Cheryl was kind of describing, like this uniqueness. It's not like, oh, we're all part of the same thing because we see the world the same way. Just this like new room that I didn't know existed. And so when I look around and like kind of just as a compliment to Taylor's, there's like a desire to be stirred. And I imagine I have this like at least this story that like the people sitting around here that I don't know like could probably stir me pretty well. So yeah, that's it with me.
I'm so enchanted by Ethan's facial expression, noticing the baby.
Yeah. How'd you know that that's what caught my attention?
Well, you did mouth out.
Ah, yeah. I do.
I mean,
Can
ESPN.
we pin the baby? It's pretty funny.
Can I share one thing?
Please, yeah.
I really liked when you brought up faith earlier. And for me, like I grew up in a Christian home as well. And so faith kind of was a loaded word for me. And so how I've come to redefine it, there's a little passage that has been, I guess, one of my deepest that I've kept close to my heart. So I just want to share it with you all quick. It's by Christian D. Larson. It says, "Promise yourself to be so strong that nothing can disturb your peace of mind. Look at the sunny side of everything and make your optimism come true. Think only of the best, work only for the best, and expect only the best. Forget the mistakes of the past and press on to the greater achievements of the future. Give so much time to the improvement of yourself that you have no time left to criticize others, and live in the faith that the whole world is on your side as long as you are true to the best that is in you." And I don't know, I think we're seeing that happen in a big way.
Yeah. That's landing for me. And it's landing for me, interestingly enough, in relation to the question that Tanya had asked. I've had a very troublesome relationship with desire, like all throughout my life. And so I think in a lot of ways, like hearing that passage kind of puts into question, like, okay, what's the bestness that's underneath that? If I know that desire is not that to a certain degree, what's beneath that thing? And that's making me recall when Tanya asked that question, like, it fucked me up actually. Like I felt my brain kind of go like, because I looked in and I went like, I actually don't really desire anything. Like I'm just kind of happy you guys are here. And so in a way, like I'm being fed like moment to moment with just all y'all. And the part of me is also kind of like really happy that for once I'm on a platform not alone with people that I love deeply and who have developed relationships with from halfway around the world, might I add, in ways that are just like transcendent for me. So I think if there's anything, it's just more of this, like deeper, more consistent. I'm just filled with gratitude about that at the moment.
There's one last little thing to say to wrap up, but Cheryl, did you want to say something before that?
Yeah, my desire from the field is like expressed when I saw Mary Andrea, Kira in just like the baby in the frame. And Tiffany, I think I just saw your daughter like show up, or a child show up and just bring something up. And I'm seeing LSA in this like group together. Feels like so intergenerational. And yeah, there's like something around, I think that's the word, like intergenerational. It's like seeing the babies, seeing the elders, like that in many ways is like the best expression of respond. Like we're cultivating space for intergenerational transmission of wisdom, like the kinds of wisdoms that we hold in our bodies, like young and old. I'm learning as much from Kira, the baby, as I am learning from David Birnbaum and how we've held space together. So yeah, that feels very deep for me. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for being here. Yeah, we're heading into a retreat in August where we are doing a practitioner retreat, sort of open to everybody. There are actually 2 spaces left if anybody feels called to come, but it will be followed by a scholar retreat. We're bringing all of the galaxy brains in to help us out. Then a guide retreat where we will all hang out and try to coordinate our efforts. It's an experiment. We haven't done that before. We did 1 scholar retreat so far. But we're going to try to bring together a group of, I think it's currently 16, might get to 19 people for 2 weeks in Bergerac in France. And yeah, I hope that following that, we have some kind of thing that we can invite people into with a clarity and a direction and a sort of set of responsibilities and accountabilities that we can really open up and start to spread. The goal is, I mean, in John's words, to steal the culture. In other words, just to like bring wisdom from the edges to the center. And if we don't want to call it wisdom, that's also okay. But bringing this sense that we all have that draws us forward back into the middle of life. I see that as essential. And so, yeah, if you do too, like, feel free to be in touch. Hopefully we can all move together forward. I mean, thank you, Peter, for like throwing us this like opportunity to speak one last time at the Stoa. Feels really precious to me.
David's asking if there's a website.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. It's rspnd.network.
All
And
right.
Beat you to it, mate.
Oh, that oh, you did it. Yeah. And there's a video on there that is like we did at the Utah conference that just kind of outlines a lot more, in a lot more detail, like what we've been up to the last year and a half.
All right. I like to do this thing where if people want, unmute yourself, say goodbye. We'll probably find ways to be in relationship again soon. So thank you, Peter. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Thank you, the Stoa. Like what a sanctuary it's been for this work.
I'll second that. Thank you from my heart, Peter.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, David. The last session of the Stoa is coming next Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern time. Check that out, Breathing into Presence. But yeah, Cheryl, Nathan, everyone, thanks so much for coming out to the Stoa today. Mwah.